Dowry laws were created to protect women. But what if a fear of the very same laws keeps them silent? What if victims of dowry harassment fear the laws more than they fear their own abuses? Today, we have with us two women lawyers who have taken these questions to the Kerala High Court. Welcome to the News Minute. I'm Sukanya, and we have with us advocates Telmi Jolly and Tulsi Kalishwaram Raj, who have filed a public interest litigation in the Kerala High Court seeking to decriminalize the giving of dowry. Now, for clarity, as the law stands today, taking, giving, and abetting dowry are punishable by law. These young women have told the court that the giving of dowry has to be decriminalized so that more victims and families are encouraged to speak up about their experiences of harassment without the fear of imprisonment. Before we get into this conversation, let me remind you that this is a discussion about justice, courage, and a system that is meant to protect. We at the News Minute are determined to bring you conversations that go beyond the news cycle. But to do this, we will need your support. Do subscribe to the News Minute or contribute to any of our reporting funds. You can log on to our website or scan the QR code that is on the screen. Now let's get into the conversation. Telmi and Tulsi, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So let's start the conversation. So at the onset, I want to ask you both a very basic question. Either of you can jump in on this. Can you just simplify where dowry laws stand as of today and why you think that it is necessary for them to change?
Right, I'll probably start with this. So we know that the problem of dowry, of course, is a very widespread social practice in Indian society, and we know that it's a problem that's been going on for generations together. Now, as far as the law is concerned, the statute was introduced in 1961 for the purpose of ultimately curbing this evil, and that is the aim of the statute as originally intended. But there are various factors why dowry does not get reported in our society, and much of this is attributable to the socio-cultural setup that we live in. Many of us are of the impression, are of the belief, societies are of the idea that things which happen in the matrimony, things which happen within the domestic sphere, things which happen between families, which are, hopefully trying to form an alliance, should not be reported to the authorities, should not be made public, and should be kept within the limits of these families and limits of the confines of the home. But apart from this reason, there is another reason which we found in the research that was undertaken that was inherent in the law itself. Right? So we looked at the law, and the law, in fact, Section 3 of the statute places the giver of the dowry on an equal footing with the recipient of the dowry. And we know, going by the gender relations in our society as to how the practice operates, how families of the girl very often are coerced into giving dowry, and in such a socio-political setup, to put the giver as well as the taker of the dowry in equal parlance, as if they are both equally culpable and there is no unequal bargaining power between the two, is quite disturbing, and that is a problem that goes to the root of the law itself. And this is where the thought came from to challenge the provision, as we found that there is a inherent problem with the law which prevents the effective implementation of the law and frustrates its very purpose.
Okay, so I just have this one question. We are having this conversation also at a time when we're talking about bringing down expenses related to marriage. That is also being mooted at the state level. And what we do observe is that a lot of times in marriages, dowry is mutually agreed upon. And sometimes it's also reflective of the status symbol of a family, that we gave so much money or that we have so much money. And some people do believe that increases the status of the woman in her matrimonial home as well. So one question I have is this proposal that you have, in any way, do you fear that it might promote the freer bargaining for dowry, or to, would people feel freer to give dowry in that sense, taking all the other things into context?
So initially, the system of dowry was prevalent among the upper caste people or in the Brahmanical society. But later it came to, all types of people. Now dowry is prevalent among everybody. So if somebody wants to give, there is already an exclusion in the act itself. There is a specific act also called maintenance of list, where, the list of the provision mandates that the list has to be made of whatever gifts have and given to the bride or bridegroom. So that exclusion is already there. But what if somebody does not want to give? Now we know how the price of the gold is skyrocketing. So what if a family cannot afford to give? Where do they stand? How is the law going to protect those victims? So dowry, if you see, it's not a women favorable provision or anything. It's a custom that has been, prevalent. And this, decriminalizing the giving of dowries does not in any way means that it is approved or it's encouraged. It only means that parents, you don't attribute guilty mind to the parents of the women. So this in no way promotes or encourages, but it only wants to protect the women and their family so that they come forward and report abuses.
Yeah, it's also an excellent question that's been asked, and that's that's a general problem with collective action issues such as bribery, for instance, where you have sort of culpability which could be attributed to both parties. But of course, dowry stands, we believe, on a different footing, greatly because of the unequal gender relations. And one of the points that you've made is also quite relevant in terms of the social conditioning that has happened in women's families these days, and the need to have a status-based amount of dowry that is to be given in the matrimony. But we also know at the back of our minds that this also comes as a part of social conditioning, and this voluntary nature of giving dowry is being perpetuated in society as something that is obligatory for the family of the girl to give, and not necessarily as something that should determine the worth of a woman. So we believe that it's the idea of status connected to dowry has also emerged as a result of this unfortunate social conditioning, I would say, and that also needs to be curbed. And we believe that the lack of penalization of giving of dowry and encouraging the victims of dowry to actually report demands of dowry would, in fact, go a long way in undoing the social conditioning as well.
But another question that I have is, doesn't the law as it stands right now provide for an exception against penalization? Like even now, is it the case that whoever reports a case of dowry harassment, like we've seen so many dowry deaths in Kerala recently, really, really terrifying stories of harassment and assault that women have had to go through. Several of them have passed away, unfortunately. But we don't see convictions in any of those cases of the family or the parents. So I also want to make it clear also for our listeners, doesn't the law already have an exception? And how is the change that you're proposing different from it? Or why do you think it's important, necessary for the statute to explicitly say that givers will not be penalized?
Right. So you're right to a limited extent. So Section 7(3) of the Act says that when a statement is made by a person aggrieved by the offence, the person shall not be subject to prosecution under the Act. So there's a very limited exemption that is granted under the statute itself. But the problem is that since there is a parent provision, namely Section 3 of the Act, which gives a blanket penalty for giving or taking of dowry, the limited exemption that is granted under Section 7(3) is insufficient. So there are various problems with Section 7(3) to show as to how limited it is. So the protection under 7(3) only applies when the person comes forward and it's only applying in the limited case of a statement made. So there is, the fear of prosecution in many cases arises from the very beginning, at the stage of deciding whether to file a complaint, at the time of having received the demand for dowry, and so on and so forth. And there is also other problem with Section 7.3 is that it only deals with the statement made by the very person that is aggrieved. It does not apply to the other relatives of, for example, the woman, who also are subject to the same coercion, also are put in the same position, the parents of the woman, the relatives of the woman, and it does not cover all actions of the person also. So this is this is why Section 7.3 basically becomes redundant when it comes to protecting the victims of dowry and protecting the act of actually giving dowry and are being forced to give dowry, and that is a problem that we've identified with the statute, and that is why we think that the original provision, that is Section 3, which is the provision which penalizes the giving and taking, that itself needs to be, attacked to the extent to which it penalizes the giving.
Also, Section 7.3 in itself is not a clear provision. It creates a sort of ambiguity. It does not say what kind of statement has to be filed, or it does not say who is the aggrieved person who can come forward with the statement. Further, in 2007, there was a Delhi High Court case called Neera Singh vs. State NCT of Delhi. So, in that case, the father of the bride is also termed as an accomplice, like a partner in crime. So, in certain situations, what happens is, because of this provision, Section 3, even though Section 7 Clause 3 is there, in most cases, the bridegroom's family uses this provision, Section 3, to file counterblasts or retaliatory cases against the women and their families. Even when Section 7 Clause 3 is there, there are cases reported from Madras High Court or Delhi High Court on this. Also, it is important to note that you cannot treat the giver and taker of dowry at the same level. They are not in par, because there is no pressure to receive dowry, but there is a certain kind of pressure to give dowry. So, the punishment, when you give equal punishment to both the parties, you're treating them at the same part, when they do not have the same bargaining power. So even the National Commission of Women in 2005 itself had suggested that, there should be separate penalty for both giver and taker. So till now we have the same penalty. So you cannot treat them equally. They're not committing the same kind of crime. Giving or taking, it's not safe, because they're not at the same, this power imbalance between the boy and girl in a marriage. So Section 7.3, even though it's there, it does not, invalidate the issue.
Right. Your petition also challenges a long-standing legal framework. So I'm also curious to know what kind of research or what kind of data analysis has gone into this. How did you both arrive at this point where you decided that, this is something we need to go to court about? And how did you go about collecting data or, research for it?
Initially, we went through all the judgments, the Supreme Court, the High Court judgments that we had, and then we also analyzed all the provisions at hand. There is the 1961 Act, there is the Maintenance of Illicit Act of 1985, there is the Kerala Dowry Prohibition Rules of 2004. So we analyzed all this provision. There are also certain reports. 1975 report is there, and then there's a report of 1980 of the Joint Parliamentary Committee. So our research is mostly based on all these provisions, the cases of the Supreme Court and High Court, and the reports, and then various studies that were undertaken, which are available on the EPW Frontline. And then we've also used data from the National Crime Reports Bureau, the data that is given on the website of the Kerala Police, official website of the Kerala Police. We've also filed an RTI, asking for data to collect the numbers, to get an idea of the crimes that were registered from, say, 2000 to 2025. So these were some of the primary needs from which we collected the data.
Yeah, we also found out that when we looked at the reports, many of these reports are quite old, in fact. If you look at the National Commission for Women recommendation, as well as the Joint Parliamentary Committee report, that was in fact in 1971. And the act was passed in 1961. So immediately after or around the time of passing of the act itself, it was noticed that the act has an inherent problem. And I believe that the act went on to have this equal penalization, despite criticism from various angles that this could lead to a problem of placing the giver and the taker on equal balance, and this maybe this will not achieve the objective that the act intends to achieve, despite these kind of concerns for reasons unknown to us, and for reasons probably ostensibly on the idea of protecting families or protecting marriage. This provision was introduced in the act. And we also noticed that if you look at the data, be it the NCRB data or the data from the police statistics, if you look at the number of cases that are taking place in terms of dowry harassment and the number of cases that are actually being reported, you see a mismatch. You see that there is definitely a greater number of cases that are actually taking part, and much less number of cases that are actually being reported to the law enforcement authorities. And of course, there are, while other reasons exist for the underreporting, when one of the reasons for underreporting goes to the root of the law, and that is inherent in the law itself, that is a problem that can be only addressed through judicial review. There are, of course, a lot of socio-cultural aspects that the judiciary has a very limited role to play in, and that the government has to do, the executive has to take care of, in terms of effective awareness, empowerment of women, and so on and so forth. But this problem with that is inherently in the law is only curable through a litigation of this nature, and only curable through the court.
Right. So, if your revisions are adopted, what real change would a woman experience the moment she walks into a police station? Or do you think the change would happen before that, in the process where she decides to file a complaint? Or what is the real tangible change that you hope would happen?
If the giving of the dowry is decriminalized, if Section 3 is in fact struck down to the extent to which we are seeking it to be struck down, then of course the people who are coerced to give dowry can freely report it without the fear of self-incrimination. Right now, the problem is that since there is always a potential for having a crime registered against the woman and the family of the woman, there is much less reporting of cases. There's much less possibility for the woman to walk into the law enforcement authority and actually prompt and register a case. And the same goes for the relatives of the women as well. And this fear basically is completely erased the moment you decriminalize the giving of dowry. And if only the taking is criminalized, that also identifies the problem in the way that it needs to be addressed, right? The problem of dowry essentially originates from the demand to take dowry. And once you curb that, and once you enforce the curbing of that in an effective sense, then the social menace of dowry can be effectively, restrained as well. And this goes to the root of the problem as to which side you want to be on, and which side the law wants to be on as well. And this is ultimately the resolution that we are trying to seek, that the victims are actually treated as victims and not treated as criminals. And that should come from the law itself.
Also, this remove the initial deterrence that is there in the minds of women. Like, when you want to file a complaint, they do not feel threatened to go to a police station, speak openly about it, or when a problem comes, they can go, seek return of the whatever dowry is given. So there is that open platform for all of them. But all said that, I feel this is also a very long process, because there needs to be a behavioral change, and that will take some time. But the first step is that that particular fear has to go. And then, there needs to be this behavioral change, which will take some time, but initial deterrence has to.
Right. But right now, also a lot of dowry, like you said, just to make it a little bit more clear. Right now, the law penalizes the giving, taking, and abetting of dowry. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And also, there is so what you cannot give, take, or abet is dowry, as in an explicit demand to marry a woman, something that the woman has to pay. But gifts are acceptable. So the law does not penalize giving gifts. So a lot of dowry is also given as gifts. So that is still going to be there. And right now also, even in the presence of, a legal exception for those who are complaining, and for even after penalizing taking and giving of dowry is being given also in the name of gifts. So do you think this contradicts in any way?
So in 1975 only, there was a report. The report was called Towards Equality. So in that report, it is, this whole ambiguity of the term gifts are discussed as to, you can give anything in the name of gift, and that particular report has flagged this issue. Also, that report in 1975 had said, that there should also be penalizing of showcasing of all this gifts. So, even in Kerala, we see on the day of the wedding that a certain brand of car is brought and given. So even that, perpetuates, you see one family giving a certain brand of car, the other family is pressurized to give a better brand of car. So even in 1975 itself, this issue was discussed, and, the report had said, the report was prepared by the Ministry of Social Welfare. They had said that, there should be penalty for this, and the term, gift, you cannot bring anything under the purview of gift. But I think that's a battle for another day, because it will take another round of litigation to, clarify what comes under the purview of gift.
Yes. It is a lacuna in the law itself, we think, actually, because it's interesting, because the law, when it came into being, there is, of course, the Prohibition Act of 61, but the legislature of course, could very easily foresee that, something that is disguised as gift could be very easily given in the form of dowry, but gifts are not penalized, interestingly enough. And what has been done is there's a maintenance of list of the gifts that is given at the time of the marriage, which, interestingly enough, the bride and the groom have to keep. So they are obliged to keep the list of gifts, and many of us don't know this, and we don't know this because it's rarely enforced, right? And unfortunately, there is no authority that is equipped with looking at whether these lists are actually being kept or not in any marriage, right? We have all participated in the weddings of our friends or our own weddings, and in none of these scenarios, nobody even brings up the point, or there is not even an awareness as to whether there is an obligation on the bride and the groom. It's sort of semi-voluntary, the way in which the rules have phrased it, and there is no oversee of whether this is actually being implemented. There is also no penalty for actually not abiding by it, which is precisely why this is being widely flouted. So that lacuna goes to the root of the law itself, that the law permits giving of gifts. And unless and until there are effective guidelines that is in place, either by the executive or by the court, that let's say the dowry prohibition officers are required to examine the list of gifts and ensure that the gifts are actually maintained at the time of marriage and nothing is added or subtracted from it later. So then there is a very specific list of items are maintained, so as to ensure that there is the practice of dowry is not perpetuated. And since that is not there, and unless that is actually implemented by the law or the guidelines by the court, the maintenance of list rules, which will continue to be an empty letter in the law.
Right. So, what effect will this provision have on other marital rights like alimony, maintenance, etc.? Considering in Kerala, there's already a pushback from a lot of men's rights voices that dowry cases are fake and women demand unnecessary like exorbitant amounts in the name of alimony and maintenance, which we know are untrue. We know that it's very arduous for women to access maintenance and alimony in the country, but there is a general narrative of this sort. So I also want to know if you foresee an impact on these other rights that women have, matrimonial rights as well, if this revision is adopted.
Right. So, firstly, we think that dowry and domestic violence, for instance, have a close link, and that's what has been demonstrated by, sociological and other studies. So, one of the potential impacts might be that the reduction of dowry and the pushback against the giving of dowry might lead to a reduction in the number of cases of domestic violence to begin with, and that's already something probably that's something that we can foresee that's positive that will happen in the domestic sphere. Now, in terms of alimony and maintenance is concerned, I think what very often happens is that it's very difficult. If you look at the statistics, if you look at the actual data for women to actually implement and receive maintenance in majority of deserving cases. But what happens often is that the one case in which there might be an exception, in which there might be something that is an unreasonable demand that comes from a particular woman, gets highlighted and gets reported widely, and that leads to this impression that this is a failure of the alimony law, and that's basically a disproportionate understanding of why the law was initially in place and what is the total data at enforcement and whether effective enforcement takes place at all. And this sort of leads to a perpetuation of the idea that now all of a sudden there is an equal bargaining power between the man and woman, and now there is no need for alimony, or now there is no need for maintenance, which I think fails to understand gender relations and fails to really look at the extent of gender inequality which takes place, I think, in our societies, and not only the rural parts but also in very so-called liberal upper class and upper caste urban households as well.
Right. So to wrap up this conversation, when we began, I began with this, with this question about whether when victims fear the law more than they fear their abusers, how is that a problem? So do you look at this as essentially a problem of the law? Of course, you do look at it as a problem with the law itself, but there's also an enforcement problem, which Tulsi also mentioned in our conversation. So to wrap up, what are your thoughts on how much more collaborative efforts have to be made from the state, from society, etc., to actually make these laws effective?
So if you see, this is not a new issue that has suddenly come. It's if you see 1970s also, you might have heard the term called stove deaths or kitchen sati. So when the act came in 1961, post that from 1970s to 1990s, in the north, all these terms have been very prevalent. Suddenly the sari of a woman using kerosene, daughters, and matchstick, and all those deaths are down as accidental deaths. So it's nothing, the issues there since 1961 itself. So even though there are rules like the Kerala prohibition rules of 2004, or even the Nirbhaya policy of 2022 mentions, about having premarital counseling for all the couples. So, implementation will take a combined effort of everybody, the lawmakers, the police, the executive, or the community. We have stringent provision. In 2005, only the Supreme Court, in one case, in a reference case, said that it requires a social revolution. That if the change has to come, that change has to come from everywhere. Like the women have to choose, like the father of the bride has to choose not to give dowry, or the young man in a country has to decide that they have to choose their partners in a fair manner. So change has to come from all the sides. So if we have a stricter enforcement of the provisions like Rule 5 and 6 of the Kerala Dowry Prohibition Rules, Rules 5 says that, the complaints have to be collected by the district dowry prohibition officer. Rule 6 says that there has to be awareness campaigns. Rule 6 also says that, the data collected by the district dowry prohibition officers have to be, given to the chief dowry prohibition officers. There has to be follow-ups of this complaint. If you see, the rules are in place. What is needed is a stricter enforcement of this provision. So I think that will require a combined effort of everybody.
Like,
Right about the consolidation that is required, and we also need to. I mean, I think very often we lawyers tend to think that all the problems can be solved by the law itself, which I think is just untrue. Because as a social practice goes, the concerted effort has to come from both the civic society, the police and the law enforcement, the executive, and it's only when there is this united effort that's happening from all sides to implement the law, to ensure its lack of abuse and so on and so forth, then only and we know that this change is quite gradual as well. As a social problem, the eradication of dowry is going to take time, but it's definitely something that's we think worth pursuing.
Right. So just to wrap up, I'm sure we're all on the same page about not giving and not taking dowry. So so as lawyers also, is there something that is you want to tell young women and men who are entering into marriages?
I mean, in terms of the law, I think, and in terms of the social conventions, one of the problems I think is that the talk about dowry is normalized inside families, and I think that needs to be resolved first, and that needs to be looked down upon, and that needs to be condemned among persons of marital age, people who are about to get married or who are planning to get married, and once we have shame associated with the giving and taking of dowry, that itself will lead to curbing of the practice, and that has to evolve, that has to evolve, and that has to come from the society and from the youngsters who are intending to enter into marital relationships. The other is, of course, of women who should choose to leave marriages where there is dowry-related harassment, and which are toxic by the very nature of it. And of course, it's much easier said than done. And we know that there are familial pressures, there are family ties, there are social cultural factors which very often cause the women to stay in toxic marriages, in unhealthy marriages, in marriages where there is dowry harassment by the husband and by the relatives of the husband. And the problem is how much we are able to empower the women to actually come out of these toxic relationships, and that will also go a long way in reducing or curbing the practice of dowry and helping women to come out of these very difficult, unfortunate spaces.
Like we started this conversation, you said there is certain status attached to giving of dowry. So yeah, what Tulsi said is important. Instead of status or social acceptance of dowry, there should be this shame attached. If we start looking down on people and even take dowry, or if you attribute this things as irrelevant, then if we start speaking against dowry, I think the change will eventually come.
Thank you, Tulsi, and thank you, Tell-Me, for joining us on this conversation. Tulsi's and Tell-Me's petition is at the Kerala High Court right now, and the Kerala government has informed the High Court that they are ready to look at revising these provisions. We will keep following this case. Thank you very much once again. Thank you to everyone who's watching.